Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. Grave's cold embrace revealed. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scray Fiction. Chapter 1. The Unearthed Secrets. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the old cemetery. In the small American town of Ridgewood, the distant hum of construction equipment was a stark contrast to the silence of the graveyard. The cemetery, long forgotten and overgrown, was being unearthed for a new housing development. Among the rusted gates and crumbling tombstones, workers dug with a mix of indifference and curiosity. Anna Reynolds, a local historian with a fervent passion for Ridgewood's past, stood beside the excavation site. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she glanced at the freshly disturbed earth. "This is it," she said, her voice barely audible over the rumble of machinery. "This is the find of a lifetime." Mark Davis, the skeptical archaeologist brought in to oversee the dig, adjusted his glasses and peered at the grave being unearthed. "Or it's a giant mess of trouble," he muttered. His hands, stained with dirt, wiped across his brow. The symbols etched into the old stone were unlike anything he had seen before. "These markings, they're unusual. We need to be cautious." Lisa Carter approached, her face pale and eyes red-rimmed. Her son, lost to a tragic accident, had been buried in the town cemetery years earlier. She was drawn here by the ghost of her grief, hoping to find solace or perhaps some connection to the past. She glanced at the newly revealed grave, its symbols casting an ominous shadow. "I just want to understand." Jake Turner, a local journalist with a nose for sensational stories, hovered nearby, his camera clicking away. "This gold," he said, flashing a grin. "The perfect angle for a big scoop. Just imagine the headlines." As twilight settled, an uneasy silence fell over the site. A sudden chill swept through the air, making Anna shiver. She looked around, but the workers and journalists seemed oblivious. It was then that Lisa's voice trembled. "Did you hear that?" A strange noise, like distant whispers or rustling leaves, filled the air. Mark frowned, brushing off the sensation as a trick of the wind. But Jake, his excitement waning, shifted nervously. The ground seemed to shift beneath them, the air growing heavier. Anna's heart raced as the feeling of being watched intensified, an inexplicable dread settling in. In the encroaching darkness, the symbols on the grave glowed faintly, their significance unknown, but undeniably unsettling. Ridgewood's quiet cemetery had just become the epicenter of a mystery, and the unearthed grave was only the beginning. Chapter 2. Whispers of the Past. The dim light of the cemetery's floodlights flickered as the crew packed up for the night. The grave, now fully unearthed, loomed with an eerie presence. Anna Reynolds lingered, her gaze fixed on the cryptic symbols carved into the weathered stone. She felt a shiver of excitement mingled with unease. Back at her study, Anna spread out the historical records she had collected over the years. The walls of her home were lined with bookshelves crammed with dusty volumes and old maps. The warm glow of her desk lamp cast long shadows across her face as she scrutinized the symbols from the grave against a collection of ancient texts. Her fingers traced the unfamiliar characters. Mark Davis entered, his expression skeptical as ever. "Anna, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we need to be careful. These symbols could be nothing more than old superstitions." Anna didn't look up. "You're missing the point. These symbols are part of a larger, troubling pattern. They match those found in historical records about a forgotten cult." Lisa Carter sat in a corner, her face drawn and weary. She clutched a worn photograph of her late son. The grief in her eyes was raw and palpable. "I've been coming here for years," she said quietly. "Maybe it's not just the grave. Maybe there's something more. I need to know if there's a connection between what's happening now and what happened to him." The tension in the room was palpable. Mark's disbelief clashed with Anna's growing conviction. "We need to stay grounded," Mark said firmly. "These phenomena could be coincidental." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the cemetery. They rushed outside to find several gravestones had been displaced, their stones scattered. Shadows seemed to twist and dance in the moonlight, and a cold wind swept through, dropping the temperature abruptly. Back at Anna's study, the atmosphere was thick with unease. Books tumbled from shelves as if pushed by an invisible force, and a heavy silence filled the room. The temperature plummeted, causing their breaths to fog in the air. Lisa's hands trembled as she clutched her son's photograph. Anna's voice was filled with a mix of fear and determination. "This isn't just about old legends. There's something here, something ancient and dangerous. We need to find out what this cult was and why they're linked to this grave." The shadows seemed to whisper and writhe around them as they delved deeper into the mystery. The symbols on the grave, once just strange markings, had become a doorway to something far more sinister. Chapter 3: The Haunting Unfold. The air in Anna Reynolds' study remained heavy with the chill from the graveyard as the team regrouped. The shadows on the walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, echoing the tension and dread that gripped them all. Lisa Carter's grief had transformed into a palpable terror. She'd begun to see her son's ghostly figure appearing at the edge of her vision, always just out of reach. Her sleep was plagued by nightmarish visions of dark figures reaching from the grave, their faces twisted in anguish. Each day, she grew more haggard, her once steady demeanor now marked by palpable fear. Jake Turner, camera in hand, was busy documenting every unsettling event. "I've been digging through old newspapers and records," he said, his voice wavering slightly. "There's something about a family that lived here a century ago, cursed by the occupant of that grave. Their house. It's still standing, and it's linked to the cemetery." The mansion Jake referred to was an imposing, decaying structure perched on a hill overlooking the cemetery. Its windows were dark, like hollow eyes, and the iron gate creaked ominously in the wind. The group decided to investigate, hoping the old house might shed light on the curse's origins. As they approached the mansion, an eerie fog rolled in, obscuring their path. Inside, the air was thick and stagnant. The grand staircase was draped in dust, and faded portraits of the cursed family glared down at them with hollow eyes. The walls seemed to whisper in a language they couldn't quite understand. Anna's heart raced as she stepped through a cold draft, her breath coming out in visible puffs. "We're not alone," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I can feel it." Suddenly, a low moan echoed through the mansion, and a ghostly apparition appeared, a spectral figure of a woman in old-fashioned garb, her eyes hollow and accusing. The apparition floated through the room, her sorrowful wails filling the air. Anna stumbled backward, her disbelief eroding in the face of undeniable terror. Mark Davis, ever the skeptic, was visibly shaken. This doesn't fit any rational explanation. We need to find out more about this family." Back at Lisa's home, the haunting took a personal turn. Objects began moving on their own, and Lisa's son appeared in fleeting, sorrowful glimpses. Each encounter pushed Lisa further into despair, her once solid grip on reality slipping. The revelation of the cursed family and the tangible presence of the supernatural forced the group to confront the dark truth of the grave's occupant. The mansion, the apparitions, and the moving objects all pointed to a malevolent force far beyond their initial understanding. The haunting was no longer a matter of mere legend. It was a frightening reality they could no longer ignore. Chapter 4. The Curse Revealed. The mansion's oppressive atmosphere clung to the group as they made their way back to town. The spectral woman's wails echoed in Anna's mind, a haunting reminder of the malevolent force that had been unleashed. Determined to understand the true nature of the curse, they returned to their search for answers. The local library, with its musty shelves and dim lighting, offered a respite from the eerie mansion. Anna and Mark pored over ancient manuscripts and local lore, their fingers stained with ink and dust. Lisa, still shaken, sat in the corner, her eyes distant and haunted. Jake's camera had captured unsettling footage from the mansion, but the images only added to their growing sense of dread. "Look at this," Anna said, her voice urgent. She unfolded a brittle, yellow document from a dusty book. It's a journal entry from someone who witnessed the ritual. Mark read the passage aloud, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. The ritual was intended to bind a spirit to the grave, to protect the town from its wrath. But something went terribly wrong. The journal described an ancient rite performed by a secretive cult meant to imprison a vengeful spirit. Instead, the ritual had inadvertently amplified the spirit's malevolence, trapping it in the grave, but also granting it the power to torment those who disturbed it. As they absorbed the information, the temperature in the library dropped sharply. A chill spread through the room, and the lights flickered erratically. Lisa's distress grew palpable. She clutched her son's photograph tightly, her hands trembling. The library's atmosphere grew increasingly sinister. Books began to fall from shelves as if pushed by an unseen force. Shadows seemed to writhe and twist, and the whispers of long-dead voices filled the air. Mark's skepticism was cracking. He watched in horror as a book on ritualistic curses floated above the floor before crashing down. "We have to do something," Mark said, his voice tight. "The curse isn't just affecting the grave. It's reaching out to us." Anna nodded, her face pale but determined. "The only way to break it is to find the forbidden part of the cemetery mentioned in the journal. It's where the spirit's binding is weakest." The team's resolve hardened. They made their way to the cemetery's overgrown section, guided by the journal's cryptic descriptions. The air grew colder, and the sense of being watched intensified. Each step felt like a descent into deeper darkness. The true nature of the curse was becoming clear. A spirit bound by an ancient, failed ritual, now unleashed and hungry for vengeance. The group's investigation had only begun to scratch the surface of the terror that awaited them. Chapter 5. Descent into Darkness. The cemetery's forbidden section was cloaked in shadows, a maze of crumbling tombstones and overgrown weeds. As the group entered, the chill in the air deepened and an oppressive silence weighed heavily on them. Anna led the way, clutching the journal's brittle pages, while Mark followed, his skepticism wavering with each creak of the ancient ground. The first sign of trouble came as Lisa stumbled, her eyes wide with terror. "It's getting worse," she gasped, clutching her chest. Shadows seemed to coil around her, whispering taunts in voices only she could hear. Mark reached out to steady her, but a sudden, cold gust of wind slammed him against a tombstone. He struggled to his feet, his face pale. "This isn't just about us anymore," he said, his voice strained. "The spirit is retaliating." Jake's camera caught fleeting glimpses of ghostly figures darting among the gravestones. His investigation had led him to the realization that the spirit's influence extended beyond mere hauntings. He captured footage of objects being hurled through the air and spectral hands emerging from the ground. But the more he uncovered, the more dangerous his pursuit became. Inside an ancient chapel at the cemetery's heart, the group found a hidden altar, its surface covered in intricate symbols. Anna examined the altar, her breath fogging in the icy air. "This is where the ritual needs to be performed," she said. "It's our only chance to stop the curse." Mark's eyes darted around the chapel, his nerves frayed. "We can't just walk in there and perform a ritual. We need to understand what we're dealing with." Lisa's grief had turned into a haunting madness. She clutched her son's photograph, her eyes wild. "He's calling for me. I need to find him. I can't lose him again." The group's internal strife reached a climax as the spirit's attacks intensified. Anna and Mark's partnership was tested when Mark was possessed, his voice distorted and eyes hollow. Anna fought to pull him back, her hands shaking as she tried to reconnect with the man she once trusted. Desperate, they uncovered a crucial detail. The ritual required a personal sacrifice. To appease the spirit, Anna read from the journal, one must offer a piece of their own soul. Terror and determination intertwined as the group faced their darkest fears. Each member grappled with the choice of what they were willing to sacrifice. The chapel's cold stone seemed to pulse with the spirit's anger, its whispers growing louder and more insistent. The group knew their final confrontation with the curse was imminent, and their descent into darkness had only just begun. Chapter 6. The Ritual. The chapel's oppressive gloom seemed to close in on them as Anna, Mark, Lisa, and Jake prepared for the ritual. The atmosphere was charged with tension, the air thick with an unsettling chill. They moved with a mix of dread and determination, the weight of their impending task heavy on their shoulders. In the cemetery's central burial ground, they drew a protective circle on the ground with salt and chalk, its intricate patterns glowing faintly in the candlelight. Anna arranged the ritual items' ancient texts, a chalice filled with holy water, and various symbols at the circle's center. The flickering candles cast eerie shadows on the surrounding gravestones, their light barely piercing the encroaching darkness. As they began the ritual, the spirit's resistance became immediate and violent. The ground trembled, and a low, guttural roar echoed through the cemetery. The candles flickered wildly, their flames dancing like angry spirits. Lisa's face was a mask of fear and resolve as she held the photograph of her son tightly, tears streaming down her face. Mark, still recovering from his earlier possession, struggled to maintain his composure. His eyes darted nervously as the ritual's incantations grew louder. "We need to stay focused," he shouted over the chaos. "The spirit is feeding off our fear." Jake, capturing every moment with his camera, could barely hold his equipment steady as spectral figures emerged from the shadows, their forms shifting and distorting. The air grew colder with each passing second, their breaths forming thick clouds of vapor. Objects in the cemetery, including tombstones and mausoleum doors, began to rattle and shake. Anna, her hands trembling, recited the ancient incantations. Her voice was steady, despite her fear, the words of the ritual flowing with a haunting rhythm. As she spoke, she felt a deep connection to the past, a sense of the ancient spirits swirling around them. "We must confront the spirit," she chanted, "and offer what is required." A wave of dark energy surged from the grave, and the protective circle was breached. Lisa's grief reached a crescendo as she cried out, her emotions raw and unrestrained. "I'm ready to give anything," she sobbed, "but I need to know that this will end the torment." As the final words of the ritual were spoken, a blinding flash of light erupted from the center of the circle. The spirit's wails intensified, echoing through the cemetery as if in agony. The ground heaved, and for a moment, it seemed as if the very earth might tear open. The ritual's climax was a tumult of raw emotion and supernatural fury. Each character faced their deepest fears and regrets, their personal demons laid bare. The fight to break the curse was not just a physical struggle, but a profound emotional battle. The light slowly began to fade, the oppressive darkness lifting as the spirits' howls diminished. The cemetery was silent once more, its chilling presence lingering as the group awaited the outcome of their desperate attempt to end the curse. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. The cemetery's heart was shrouded in an eerie stillness as the group braced themselves for the final confrontation. The protective circle, now smeared and uneven from the chaos, seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. The night air was thick with anticipation, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Anna, Mark, Lisa, and Jake stood within the remnants of their ritual circle, their faces lit by the flickering candles that fought against the encroaching darkness. The spirit's presence was palpable, a suffocating weight pressing down on them. As Anna resumed the incantations, the air around them grew frigid. The ground cracked open, revealing a deep, dark void from which the spirit began to emerge. The figure that materialized was both horrifying and awe-inspiring, an immense, shadowy entity with eyes like burning coals and a form that shifted and writhed as though composed of living darkness. Lisa's knees nearly buckled as she gazed upon the spirit's true form. Her grief and fear had led her here, and now, seeing the manifestation of their torment, she felt an overpowering sense of helplessness. "This is what's been haunting me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This is what I've been trying to escape." Mark, now fully committed to the fight, steadied himself. His earlier skepticism had been replaced by a grim determination. "We have to finish this," he said, his voice steady. "We have to see it through." The spirit roared, a sound like 1,000 wails converging into one, shaking the very ground beneath them. The ritual's incantations seemed to struggle against the spirit's force, the protective circle flickering like a candle in a storm. Shadows twisted and lashed out, attempting to break their concentration. Jake, capturing the spectacle with his camera, saw the spirit's power extending outward, its tendrils of darkness reaching toward him. His camera shook in his hands, and the screen displayed disturbing, fragmented images of the spirit's rage. "It's feeding off our fear," he shouted, fighting to keep his footing. "We have to focus." Anna's voice rose above the chaos, the final words of the ritual escaping her lips. Her hands were steady, despite the terror that gripped her heart. "By the power of light and truth, I command the spirit to be bound and the curse to be lifted." As the final words were spoken, a blinding light erupted from the circle. The spirit's roars turned to agonized shrieks as the darkness around them began to dissipate. The shadows that had plagued the cemetery for so long were drawn back into the void, the spirit's form collapsing in on itself. The ground settled, and the oppressive weight lifted. The cemetery, once a site of torment and darkness, now lay silent and still. Candles flickered out, leaving only the dim light of dawn creeping over the horizon. The curse had been lifted, but the battle had left its mark on each of them. Anna, Mark, Lisa, and Jake stood in the aftermath, their faces etched with exhaustion and relief. They had faced their greatest fears and sacrificed much to break the curse. As the sun rose, casting its first light over the cemetery, they knew that while the spirit had been vanquished, the memories of their ordeal would remain with them forever. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. The cemetery, now quiet and serene in the early light of dawn, bore no traces of the chaos that had unfolded. The oppressive energy that once clung to the air had dissipated, replaced by an uneasy calm. Town began to stir, the first hints of recovery visible as the sun's rays touched the landscape. Anna, Mark, Lisa, and Jake stood on the edge of the cemetery, their faces marked by exhaustion and a sense of hollow relief. The ritual had succeeded, lifting the curse, but the scars of their ordeal were deep and lasting. In the days that followed, the town slowly began to heal. The once abandoned houses and businesses near the cemetery showed signs of life as people returned, their fears gradually easing. Anna worked tirelessly to document the events, her passion for history now intertwined with a somber respect for the dark truths she had uncovered. Her scholarly pursuits had transformed into a quest for understanding and healing, driven by the memory of the spirits she had faced. Mark, once a staunch skeptic, had found a new perspective on life. The experiences had shattered his rational worldview, leaving him with a sense of profound humility. He continued his work as an archaeologist, but now with a newfound openness to the mysteries that lay beyond the empirical. Lisa's journey was one of gradual healing. The loss of her son had been a wound too deep to fully heal, but the resolution of the curse allowed her some measure of peace. She took solace in the quiet moments of her home, where she could remember her son without the shadow of the spirit's torment overshadowing her memories. Jake, whose pursuit of the truth had put him in the spirit's direct path, found himself grappling with the remnants of his ordeal. The footage he had captured was haunting, a reminder of the dark forces he had faced. He chose to share his story cautiously, careful to respect the delicate balance between the truth and the town's fragile peace. As the sun set on the final day of their ordeal, a sense of resolution pervaded the air. Yet, as the characters went about their lives, a subtle unease lingered. The cemetery's quiet was too profound, its calm almost unnatural. Anna noticed a small, unexplained shift in the shadows at the edge of the burial ground, a fleeting glimpse of something that seemed to writhe just beyond sight. In the distance, a lone figure stood at the cemetery's boundary, watching with dark, hollow eyes. The figure vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind an unsettling feeling that not all had been resolved. The town had returned to normalcy, but the echoes of the past lingered, a reminder that the supernatural's grip, though weakened, was never truly gone. The veil between the living and the unknown remained thin, and the shadows of the cemetery whispered of stories yet untold.